Let's head back to the studio for the Row J Roundtable and the critics' takes on the new Broadway revival of Fiddler on the Roof. And don't forget, you can see Michael Feinstein here at Feinstein's 54 Below. Welcome back to the Row J Roundtable. I'm joined again by contributing critic Jesse Oxfeld and executive producer Brian Scott Lipton. Jesse, Brian, thank you so much for joining us.
Thank you, Meredith.
Thanks for having me.
We're here to discuss Fiddler on the Roof, the fifth revival of Fiddler on the Roof in its 50th anniversary season that just recently opened, starring Danny Burstein. And I want to know, is it a wonder of wonder, a miracle of miracles?
I think it was just really fantastic. I enjoyed almost everything about the show. I think Burstyn's performance is wonderful and sensitive and human and not over the top and not shticky. I think it looks beautiful. I think the new choreography by an Israeli choreographer that's inspired by the traditional Robbins choreography, but gives it a real freshness. I thought the orchestra sounded wonderful. I thought Jessica Hecht was a little weird, but other than that, I just really was actually very moved by it.
This was, to me, the most dramatically moving production I've ever seen because I think of the entire cast. I thought there was a reality to these characters. Jessica is not per se a comic actress, and I think her dramatic heft, even though, yes, she does come off more humorlessly than her predecessors, but I think that's partially her brilliance as an actress, and I also think it's a reality of who this woman was. I mean, what does Golda really have to laugh about?
Right.
That's not a life I would wish probably on anybody.
And there's this whole business with, the framing device of a modern, sort of implicitly, a modern descendant of Tevye's, or just really a modern, all of us as the descendants of all of them. Was played by Burstyn, walks out, as a modern sort of American, like visiting Anna Tevka as a tourist, and then transforms into Tevye, does the show, and then it ends, he comes back out. And that moment at the end when he came back out, I actually found really, really moving.
How we see modern day Tevye is within a red parka. The red parka is removed. At the beginning, we see shtetl Tevye. At the end, the red parka is put back on as they're all leaving Anna Tevka.
He sort of gets out of the line and puts back on this.
Right. Tevye becomes us. Tevye becomes the modern day refugee, something that is all a part of our history and heritage.
That's what we're saying. It's not just that he becomes this other person, but this other person, the descendant, then having transformed back into the modern person, goes and joins the line and stands next to Golda and grabs the milk cart and helps pull their belongings out of Anna Tevka. So it's not just that we brought back to this modern character, but this modern character is now integrated into this historical moment.
It is the saddest moment of the show that these people are forced out of their homes. But yet, in fact, is it a blessing in disguise that they're leaving a land that ultimately they would have been murdered in?
Certainly I noticed in this production is that when the Russians come and tell them that they're going to have to leave, it happens inside Tevye's barn.
Right. They're all herdled
I don't know if that's always the case that it's done in Tevye's barn.
No, it's never been.
It's never. So it's inside Tevye's barn, which we have not seen as a set piece before in the show. This set piece and all of them herded into this barn to get this news reminds you of nothing quite so much as pictures we've all seen of, sorting centers where Jews were rounded up and put on trains in Nazi Germany and occupied Europe.
And in terms of those historical moments, as the barn may build a picture for us of scenes from the Holocaust, this moment of all of these refugees leaving is one that we can associate today with scenes of Syrian refugees and people leaving the Middle East for better lives. And what does that do for this musical and putting it in to a 2015 world?
What sort of really hit me for the first time at that point is they're trying to paint it hopefully. We're moving on, I'm going here, I'm going to Jerusalem, I'm going to Chicago, I'm doing this. In fact, they're all sort of like heading west to, we know, and they don't, be murdered in about 30 years.
Well,
I mean, unless they do successfully get to Chicago. But
I never really thought about that, but coming to your personal connection, all four sets of my great-grandparents left Europe at the beginning of the 20th century. But all of them made it here. So I never really thought about the fact that there were people who tried to make it here, perhaps who didn't. Whereas with my stepmother's family, I know many of who died in the Holocaust, but they never tried to get out of Europe. They were people who chose to stay in Europe. So it never really actually occurred to me until you just brought that up that there may have been people who tried to get to America in 1904 and never made it.
If you wanted to interpret it thus, you could look at this, if you were Benjamin Netanyahu, you could look at this as saying, we're the same as these people and they're always trying to kill the Jews, so Barack Obama never should have made a deal with Iran. I'm not saying that's my politics, and I'm not saying that I think that's what Sharon intended, but certainly you could look at this and say, hey, we're in the same position, our lives are still as shaky as a fiddler on the roof.
To me, whatever political points were being trying to make by Bart in this production, as relevant and as smart as they are, to me they still play second fiddle, pun intended, to the personal story.
Sure.
And what I love about this production is I think how well he honed in on the family dynamics and the personal story. And I think the political discussion, to me personally, is far less important.
Well, at least I could talk about Fiddler forever. But moving on.
We'll wait somewhere else.
Right. Exactly. Moving on, I want everybody's fall favorite pick from the 2015 fall season as we move into the spring season.
And we're not including Hamilton.
We're not including Hamilton. It is one of our favorites, if not on par with whatever we are going to pick.
I probably have to go with Fiddler and Color Purple, both of which I thought were just extraordinary.
I also would go with The Color Purple because I was actually one of the few critics the first time around who actually really liked the production. I was the outlier back in 2005. I like the material, while seeing some of the flaws in the production, and I do think what John Doyle has done in streamlining it and minimalizing it has given it a power that it didn't have the first time, and Cynthia Erivo is extraordinary.
All three of the women are extraordinary.
Jennifer Hudson, Danielle Brooks. I mean, I cannot fault everyone. And also, I would say maybe my second choice, and shockingly, is View from the Bridge, a play I've seen a lot, and which I was very skeptical of, not only going into it, but even for the first few minutes, because Ivo van Hove's conception seemed so gimmicky when it started that I just thought, 2 hours of watching these people barefoot in a glass box is just not going to work. But kudos not only to him, but to the entire cast, and especially Mark Strong, who's Eddie Carbone, I just thought was transcendent, and that takes nothing away from both Liev Schreiber and Anthony LaPaglia, who were extraordinary. And so I would say those were my two sort of must-sees of the last few months.
Yeah, and I would agree with View from the Bridge. It was my very first Bridge, and I absolutely loved it. I was also thinking about The Humans, which I really loved and found to be such a groundbreaking play. But I'm going with possibly surprisingly, King Charles III, because I really loved spending an evening with the royals and possibly getting as close as I ever will to a fictional version of Prince Harry and Prince William. And I think this is my fall favorite pick, and you should not miss.